No, not at all. No, absolutely. Totally fine. All right. So the first thing I want to say, midterms. You're gonna get them back on Thursday. I don't know if that's a yay or a boo, but you'll get them back on Thursday. They're not all graded yet, so that's why I don't know if it's a yay or a boo. Also, that means that we'll have more time spent going over things, which again can be a yay or a boo. Who knows how you're feeling about it? But yeah, we'll go over that. Also, any leftover homeworks you haven't gotten back from me yet, I am going to be taking care of any ones that weren't turned in yet so those will also be coming back. I'll probably be emailing them back Thursday afternoon, and then we'll go over them Thursday in class. So just be on the lookout in your inbox for stuff coming back to you. But yeah, you also are going to have your last official regular weekly homework assignment will be next week. I'll talk about it more at the end of this class of what it's going to be, but it's going to be about the stuff today, and it's going to be like a usual sort of, or it's going to be, I think some of the earlier homeworks I had to go online and find an example of this question. It's all going to be that. And again, it's going to be much more about showing that you put in the effort to do it than getting the perfectly right answer. It's just going to be like, go on the internet and find some stuff. Yay. So yeah, and then after that, we are starting next week and have, I guess, I can't remember how many weeks it's going to be, but then we're going to get much more into the ethics part of the ethics and critical thinking. So we're going to be talking about what ethics is, and then some particular ethical questions, a lot of them having to do with the internet because it's a topic that interests me. And all the ways in which the internet is chaos and terrible and glorious in all of its ways. So today, though, we are going to be talking about so basically what you can think of today's class as is kind of a follow-up of what we did last time, which is just going to be more things that happen in the human mind that prevent us from reasoning well and from getting to the true answer. And last week was talking about basically the ways in which our own brain is designed to do things other than get us to the truth. And sometimes it leads us to do things like be racist or misidentify statistics and things like that. This class, we're going to be talking about how principles from social psychology do the same sort of thing. So what is social psychology? First off, what's psychology? Anyone know? Anyone taken a psych class out of curiosity? So what is psychology?
That was a few semesters ago.
Yeah. So the best way, well, what is an ology? What is biology? Or yeah, it's research or the study of. Got it. Was that you who had a hand?
Yeah, I was going to say, in psychology, a study of the mind and behaviors.
Exactly. It's the study of the mind. So psychology is the ology of the mind. So basically, what you do in a psychology class is study everything about human behavior and the human mind and all that fun stuff. There's a lot of different things you can talk about it. Social psychology, however, is one field within it, based on what is it to be social? What is socialness? Yeah, talking. It's basically just anything that involves interactions between people. So what social psychology is basically the mental systems that are responsible for the ways we interact with each other, and also the ways in which our interactions with other people affect our mind and the way we think. And so we often like to think of ourselves as basically, I'm who I am, I do what I want, and then I interact with other people. But often it goes the other way as well, where like, I do what I want, but some of what I do and think I want is really determined by what's going on around me, and specifically by what other sorts of people I'm interacting with and how they are interacting with me, and how certain basically how the human mind can be affected by other people and by my desire to interact with other people in certain ways. And a lot of these can be very powerful. And the reason we're talking about this is because a lot of these powerful methods of affecting your mind are things that can lead you to not reason well, and to lead you to draw conclusions which might be irrational or wrong. Or what you find is that rather than trying to find out what's really true or what you should really care about, what you end up doing is doing things because of the principles of just other people around you and the ways that interact. So what I really want to talk about today is just 5 different ways, or I guess 5 different phenomena that have been studied by social psychologists, talk about why these things happen, talk about the pressures behind them and the ways in which you can see how these sorts of things both cause you just in general to behave in ways that are not necessarily what you want to do if your goal is to get the right answer, the truth. And also then how people who understand how these work can use them to manipulate you into doing things like buying Instagram clothing you don't need. So yeah, that's what the discussion is going to be today. All right, I'm going to put down the two more people just came in, so I want to put this down. She came in and Shola came in. All right. So trying to think, do I want to start with the principle or do I want to start with the phenomenon? Do you want me to put down the principle first, or do you want me to talk about a thing and then lead us to the principle? I'm leaving this open to whoever cares. Phenomenon first. Okay, there's a few. Okay, this one actually involves a couple others. All right, a couple different social psych principles. But basically, I want to start with peer pressure. We all know what it is. If I were to ask you all, have you ever been peer pressured? It would be a test of are you awake or not, because everybody's been peer pressured at some point. The question is, though, one is basically, why does it work? Or why does it happen? And there's a few different levels you can answer this on. One of these is just your fundamental level of why do you feel the pressure, or why is it in that moment you feel pressured, you do something. And then a more general question, like a more scientific level question, is why is it that we have mental systems that, or I guess we could also just say how is really question one. How does it work? And then the second question is why does it work? And the second version of why does it work is why on earth are we a species that is open to peer pressure? So first off, peer pressure, how does it work? Just really describe in the moment what it feels like to be peer pressured. Because like describing it from the outside, you aren't in like, you know, somebody tells you to do something, a few friends bust your chops and say, hey, you should do that thing. If you don't do it, you're a whatever you say. Like if we take a bird's eye view, it's not like they're holding a gun to your head. It's not like they're holding your mom hostage. How is this getting you to do something? Maybe just like secret. Yeah, there's an approval seeking. The main way in which peer pressure really gets off the ground is you are seeking the approval of other people. You're trying to get these other people, and specifically your peers, i.e. other people of your age group, of your demographic group, to approve of you or look upon you positively. Why else does it work? What is the other thing? What's the flip side of wanting their approval? What don't you want? Their disapproval. Yeah. So you want their approval and you don't want to be shamed or kicked out. So don't want to be treated as, I guess, an undeserving or be shamed or anything like that. It's basically, yeah, any sort of disapproval for them. So there's really two different things that are going on here, both of them having to do with your interactions with this group. One of them is you want approval to fit in with this group. And the other thing is you don't want to be treated like an outsider or pushed to the outside. So what peer pressure is really bringing together are two social psych principles, which we're going to talk about in a little more depth. But the first one is just called conformity. Basically, there is a tendency to conform, and conform here just means be like other things. So, you know, when you're driving down the right side of the street, you are conforming with the traffic laws, you're conforming with everybody else. If you get on the elevator and stand with your back to the wall or stand not staring a stranger in the face, you're conforming with like the social rules. The other thing is what's called in-group preference. It's typically called in-group preference, but it's got a like hidden background bit, which is, I call it out-group dislike. And what this means, this notion of in-group and out-group here, in-group are people who are members of the same group you are in. Out-group members are anyone who's outside of that group. So just to give a straightforward, well, does anyone want to come up with an example while I take a sip of water before I suffocate to death here? Anyone have an example? What is a member that you are an in-group, or you are an in-group member of something, and then who would be an out-group member relative to that.
Could you say like the Democratic Party and then the outgroup is like the Republican?
Yeah, so if you are a registered Democrat, your in-group members are other Democrats, and out-group members are anyone who isn't, including, say, Tea Party, Republican Party, et cetera. Another one, from our perspective, all of us are in-group members of the Baruch community, and out-group members are anyone who isn't, be they NYU students or like US government employees who didn't go to CUNY schools. All of those would be out-group members. And so what this basically means is we have a psychological tendency to prefer members of our in-group and to some degree dislike outsiders. And it's not like a universal sort of thing, and it's not that this can't be overcome, but our initial bias is generally in this way. And so there's this tendency, what we see in peer pressure is, one, there's a tendency to fit in and conform with other people of your in-group. And two, there's just a preference for other people who are like you and a dislike from the outside. So just to go back to the peer pressure case, what's happening is the other people who put the pressure on you are putting that pressure on you because they're trying to make you more of an in-group member. Therefore, they will like you more and it will make like more comfortable. If you don't do these things, you are now an out-group member who they won't like. And then you feel the push to be conforming and doing what they're doing because you have this desire to be like everybody else. So that's the basic idea. So our first two social psych principles, are these both on the board? Oh, they're right in the shiny part. I'm moving. Can everyone see this without the shininess? That's what it says. It says conformity and then in-group preference / out-group dislike. I'm gonna hold this here for you internet people for a second before I put it back, and then you can't see it anymore because of course the board is reflecting the ceiling lights directly into where I've written. All right, so this is the first two principles. Now, few different things we can ask here. One is, why do we have these things? And like, we know that they work and we know that they interact with us by like putting us and making us feel really crappy. But we can also ask the more general question of why on earth would we have these things? But then we can also, then the second thing I want to discuss is just how is it that these can be used by others to get you to believe things you shouldn't? And also, how are these things going to just get in the way of your good reasoning? So which one do you want to do first? Why on earth this happens, or what some of the issues are? Anyone have a why on earth it happens? Well, here's a few different things. So let's think back to a time in which you felt genuine peer pressure. Be it like you're in middle school and you didn't have the shoes that everyone else did and you felt terrible about yourself, or a time your friends told you you should do this even if you didn't want to and you felt that need to do it anyway. Describe what that feeling was like. Like, what does that feel like?
Feel bad.
You feel bad, but it's not just like a kind of a sadness. How does it wanted to make sure the person with the bag was the person who was supposed to get the bag. You don't want some stranger just walking up and taking your bag.
It's him.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, it's not just like you feel kind of sad. What is that bad feeling? Like, describe what, if you had to put into words what's going on in your gut, what would you be saying? Curious.
Or just conflict?
It's this conflict, it's this deep discomfort sort of thing. It's almost like, it's a similar sort of feeling you might have when you're like on edge and you're like waiting for something really bad to happen. Like, it's a similar sort of feeling to like, you know, you're walking along and you feel like something bad might be coming behind you. Like, they're not unrelated feelings. It's this high intensity stress, almost like a fear response of the same sort of thing of like, you know, when you hear a loud sound and you just get frightened, and then that feeling afterwards of what was that is very similar to this sort of like peer pressure, sort of like, oh my God, I'm not going to fit in sort of feeling. And the reason why it feels that particular flavor of bad is that, strictly speaking, you are having a life or death response. Like, the reason they feel so similar is that, psychologically speaking, the moment of feeling that urge to conform is literally a sort of life or death fear response. And the reason you have this, can anyone guess why on earth? Like, not getting the same shoes as everyone else is not going to literally cause you to die. It's not like, you know, walking through the woods and getting mauled by a bear. And yet, so mentally, neurologically, they're quite similar. Why on earth would you have this about conforming? Anyone? This goes back to something we talked about a couple classes ago. Lauren.
I'm not sure.
No,
But
no.
it could be your like fight or flight response.
Yeah, and so it's kicking in a fight or flight response. It literally is putting you into a fight or flight response. But why on earth does not having the same shoes as everyone else and feeling left out put you in a fight or flight response? And by fight or flight response, for those of you who don't know, it's this feeling in which it's basically your body releases certain chemicals in a moment in which you're in extreme panic or like extreme danger. And so it releases basically endorphins and other sorts of hormones that prepare you to either run away very effectively or fight. And so it'll cause things like your pupils expand so you can see better. Your vision kind of tunnels and whatever you're afraid of. Your heart rate rises. You get sweaty palms. Your muscles loosen up so that if this was actually a bear, you could run away. So why on earth would the not having the right sneakers lead you to feel this terrified? Well, the reason why goes back to our ancient ancestors. Ancient ancestors lived out on the plains and lived in small family groups, and we hunted and we gathered and all of this stuff. Human beings, look at your hands right now. Do you have the biggest talons? No. Feel your teeth. Do you have giant fangs that you could easily rip someone apart with? No. How many of you can jump like 20 feet in the air or climb a tree? No problem. No. So how on earth did we survive? How on earth did our ancestors survive if we weren't the strongest, we weren't the fiercest or anything like that?
Our mind.
Yeah, our mind. And specifically, one human being versus a bear, who's going to win in a fight? I mean, yeah, I guess. Well, let's imagine like your average 1,500-pound bear and your average human being. The bear's going to win. But get 15 people together and give them sticks with sharp ends, and who's going to win the fight? It starts to get a lot more even. So with human beings, basically a single human being is weak and powerless. It's only when you get us together in large groups. So back in the day, there was a need to fit in well enough with other group members so as to not get kicked out of the group. Because 50, 60,000 years ago, getting kicked out of the group, like why do we have a life or death feeling of feeling like an out-group member? Well, because our brain is programmed in a time in which getting kicked out of the group was life or death. Back in the day, if you got kicked out of the group for being a pain in the ass, you would die. You would be alone in the wilderness and get eaten by a bear. So we still, unfortunately, we haven't evolved past that point. We still feel this need to conform to other people because, and it puts us in this terrified life or death feeling because that's what it was for us and our ancestors. Nowadays, though, I mean, not matching shoes, not actually going to kill you, but it feels just like it would. And that's why it's so hard to turn away from peer pressure, is there's this real need to, fit in with the group because you are programmed to not get kicked out of it, which is this terrible thing because nowadays, we aren't in a life or death situation. And yet why is it that you have children who are getting depressed and anxious at a very young age? Well, because now all of a sudden they are being bombarded with social media things that say this is how someone your age is supposed to look. And if they don't fit in that criteria, they are being put in a fight or flight response they can't quite wrap their head around because, at age 8, I couldn't figure out why I gave a damn about peer pressure. And it's a lot easier to wrap your head around when you put it in the evolutionary context, but it doesn't make it feel any less terrible. And so that's the first part of it, the conformity bit. And the other thing that's tied in with this, and this goes in with conformity, why would there be pressures to conform or to fit in? Well, there's a few different reasons for that. One is basically, if you've got a small number of people, it's better for everyone to be working together towards any possible solution than it is to have multiple different people pulling in different directions. So like 10 people doing the same less than ideal, attempt to solve a problem is better than 10 people each trying to solve the same problem in different ways. If we have to fix one of these light bulbs, there's probably some special tool we could have that would be the best way of doing it. But if all of us work together, we could probably fix this light bulb well enough. If all 10 of us were trying to do it our own way, chaos would ensue. So there's this pressure for everyone in a small group setting to work together on one solution. And to anyone who's not working with everyone else is putting them at risk. So there's the thing of like, if everyone is trying to hunt the bear in one way, then the person who does it another way puts everyone at risk because, you know, you might piss off the bear if you show up and poke it with a too small stick. You mess up the ambush, suddenly everyone's dead. So that's why there's this urge to conform, because in a small group setting, you need everyone working together because one person doesn't and the whole thing gets screwed up. The other bit is this in-group preference, out-group dislike. And so why on earth would it be the case that we prefer people of our in-group or out-group? Why is it that we prefer people, generally speaking, who look like us or come from a similar background to us? Why evolutionarily would this be the case? Well, think about going back to our ancient caveman ancestors. Who would your in-group have been if you were living in small groups out on the African plains, hunting antelopes and running away from lions? Who would be, say that again?
Family.
Family. That says family, and that says 100% right. The main people in your initial in-group back in the day would have been your family members, because those were the people you were born into, who you worked with. And just, we are programmed to like our family. The reason why I have to do with genetics and all sorts of other stuff, but basically we are programmed to some degree to like our family. It's why every one of us, even if we hate some family member, has a really hard time stepping away from them because they're still family. We are just programmed in some deep way to get along with family. And so if we were selected to like family as our initial in-group, it just kind of expanded to any other group you're a part of. So because we're programmed to like in-groups because originally the in-group was our family, nowadays that can be taken over by anything else. So, you know, what are some classic cases of, we're going to switch over to the examples of this and ways in which it can go wrong now. What are some classic examples of in-group preference, out-group dislike that like you look at from a bird's eye view and you're like, this is a stupid thing for me to like care about, and yet I can't help but prefer people who are of this group?
Marvel versus DC.
Marvel versus DC. Like, you both really like comics. Like, you like a lot of the same things. If you're a Marvel person, you have a lot more in common with a DC person than somebody who doesn't read any comics. And yet you're going to fight about it just because they're on the other side. They're on the other group. Sports fans are another classic case. Like, the only difference is the color hat you wear. Like, let's be clear here. And yet people will kill each other over their sports fandom. Like, this is why the same player could end up playing for the other team in a year. It's not like you know anyone on this team. It's not like people from Boston are inherently evil and people from New York are inherently good. Like, there are plenty of asshole Yankees fans and there are plenty of asshole Red Sox fans and there are plenty of delightful people on both, and you all love baseball. But simply because you define yourself as a Yankees fan, you will have a preference for this person. And it's the same thing. Like, I'm sure you have it. If you see somebody wearing a t-shirt of a band you like, you immediately gravitate like, I like that person. They could be a complete asshole and you don't know it, but your initial gut feeling is, I like that person. While if they like a band or a musician you don't like, or, you know, they like a type of art you don't like or anything like that, your initial feeling is, oh, I don't like them. Same. So this is like the general way in which, you know, our preference for these in-groups and our dislike of the out-groups will end up causing us to behave in some really crazy ways. Like, really, sports is a great thing to talk about in a philosophy class because it's one of these things in which everyone lives in a society in which we all, in our common sense, understand what something like a sports team is or fandom is, just because it's like, or patriotism is another one where like it's so ingrained in our society. But when you pause and break it down and you start actually trying to figure out what the hell is it I care about, there's never a good answer. So it's just like, rather what makes it the group is simply that you've defined yourself as liking this, whatever it is. And then you end up, you know, showing preference for other people like that. Does that make sense to everyone of just like what these are and how they can kind of fall out evolutionarily speaking? Now, what I want to talk about though is why is it or how is it that these things can go wrong? So this is why we have them. But where is it in which this desire to conform ends up leading to problems, either because other people are manipulating you or because it causes you to do things which aren't in your best interests. So does anyone have any concrete or particular examples of ways? Olivia?
Maybe like joining a gang or something.
Yeah, so one way in which, like, why is it that young people who are in, finding a lack, like, in an inner city environment, which there's a lot of negativity, often find themselves drawn into gangs. One of the main forces is just the desire to conform to other people in the neighborhood. It's also why peer pressure is so much more powerful than the law in a lot of ways. Like, it's not like people who are in a gang know they aren't breaking the law. Like, just like those of us who are, jaywalking, like, we know technically speaking, but you don't want to be the one on the outside. So this need to conform can overpower things that we know are in our best interest, or know are, the fact something's illegal is overpowered by the fact that we want to conform. Danger, the same sort of thing. Like, a lot of people who join the army, one of the main ways in which you can get people to join the army is get other people from their area to join the army. Like, even if somebody, the urge to not be the one who didn't do it is stronger than the fear of life and death. These are ways in which these sorts of things can really, and so you'll end up with people joining the army who didn't in any way believe in what they wanted to do. They just didn't want to be left behind. What are some other ways in which conformity can strike?
Changing your answer on a test to just somebody else.
Yeah, that's one. Look, crap, did I get it wrong? And then you change it. And then that's that. So yeah, that's another good one. What are some other ways in which conformity can happen? Well, let me think of there was one I wanted to say. Really any sort of peer pressure situation in which, like, the need to conform can just cause you problems, but also will lead you to come to a conclusion. So one thing that can often happen is, like, this is kind of the conformity is one of the tools. I think we talked about gaslighting a couple classes ago. It's another one of these, like, the mechanisms behind getting you to doubt your own beliefs is if enough people tell you something is the case, then you will begin to doubt yourself and your own gut feeling on it. So one of the most famous examples of this going along, has anyone heard of the, I can never remember how to spell his name. I think it's ASCHE or something. The Asch conformity studies. Has anyone heard of this in their psych class? It's something that's worth talking about just because it was, like, in a laboratory setting, showed how much people would be willing to change what they did and even doubt their own beliefs based on what they were told. So I'm going to give you a test. And this test is going to be the exact same thing that the Asch conformity people were given. I'm going to draw a line, call this the arrow line. And now I'm going to draw 3 more lines. And your only task is to tell me which of the 3 lines I'm about to draw is the same line as this one. So we have line A, we have line B, and we have line C. So which of these, I can't draw perfectly, but which of these is closest in length to the one with the arrow? See, like, it's a pretty damn simple task. It's not hard. And if you give these sorts of questions to people in a normal setting, people are like 99% accurate because we all have eyes and they generally work. The way the conformity experiment worked is basically you tell everyone that they're just experimenters in here. Like, you're all subjects in my experiment. All you have to do is this perception task. But in truth, all of you except for one are actors I've paid to say the answers I want you to say. And the real subject is the one person who I didn't pay. So for the first few rounds, it's totally normal. And then all of a sudden, I'll point at, say, Lauren, and she'll say, A's the same length. And then I point at Olivia, and she says A. And then I point at Kyriakos, he says A. I point at Ryan, he says A. June says A. And then I point at Matthew and ask him, all right, Matthew, what's the right answer? And Matthew was the one person who wasn't told. And you now have this moment of, do I say what initially looked to me like the right answer, or do I give in to what everybody else says? And what they found is as many as 75% of people would at least occasionally go with what seemed originally to be the obviously wrong answer, simply because everybody else was doing it. And some of these people, it wasn't just that they, like, yeah, I didn't want to stand out and be made fun of. It was literally, they were like, you know,
I initially thought it was C, but I started to doubt my sight, and I really, I've needed glasses for a while, so maybe I just wasn't seeing it right. And so really people will change their views around these things. And you can see how this sort of thing might end up raising its ugly head in more practical situations. So think about how fake news or misinformation spreads online so quickly. Well, what is one of the major ways in which it spreads so quickly? Well, let's say it's something like the vaccine has nanobots that are like, reading your behavior or whatever other conspiracy theory. What is the main reason that this initially gets online? Well, somebody just puts it up and says, my friend said this. And now all of a sudden you've got a group of people talking online with each other about this. And I believe it. And then somebody else is like, well, yeah, that's kind of interesting. I think I might believe that too. What's going to happen after a little while? More people start believing it. And as more and more and more people start believing it, there becomes more social pressure to fit in with everyone else who believes it. So if you go into, if you go onto a conspiracy blog and start saying, I'm not so sure about this, you're going to be shunned very quickly. In the same way, like if you go onto a liberal discussion board and start talking about the joys of Fox News, like you're going to be kicked off pretty quickly. And so if you define yourself as a member of this group, what ends up happening is you start feeling this pressure to believe what other people in the group believe, even if initially you didn't feel that strongly about it. You get this urge to fit in this very strong way.
Isn't religion like a prime example?
So I would say that religion is an example in which definitely this sort of need to fit in is very commonly one of the ways in which people can become very strong believers in these sorts of things. Or at the very least, one of the ways in which what initially started as a belief that not very many people within the religious group had, spreading much farther within it. Right.
You could even relate it to something as simple as like a kid basically like following his parents' political beliefs.
Absolutely. That is a classic one. The number one cause of our political beliefs is not our brains or our like reasoning of what's right and wrong. The number one determining factor of what you believe politically and what you believe religiously are what did your parents believe. And a big part of that is you want to fit in with your family, and and there's also an approval seeking element, which is another social psych one we're going to be talking about in a little bit, is basically anyone who's an authority figure and it's more complicated with parents because we're programmed to want them to love us. We end up feeling the need to do what they want to do. So it's like, why is it that your friend who has kind of an absentee father still seeks that father's approval? Well, it's because you still have this authority figure, loving figure who's, even if they've done a lot of bad stuff, a person can't shake that need to conform to what that person would want. So yeah, that's one of the main things with conformity, is it can lead us to believe things, not because we've analyzed them as true and not because we have good evidence for it, but entirely because other people who are in a group we're a part of believe it. It's also the way in which like memes get going. Like, why is it that you want to know about the newest meme? Well, you don't want to be the one who's left out, who doesn't know about the meme. You want to conform with everyone else. So your knowledge, you want it to conform. Like, if somebody saw the funniest new cat video, you want to make sure that you fit in so that when they're talking about the funniest cat video, you're not left out. So all of those are kind of tied in here. Then in-group preference, out-group dislike. How do these sorts of things end up manifesting in bad ways? Well, one of the simplest ways is just like you end up treating people who you don't judge as your out group or your in group as you care about them less. So one of the ways in which this ends up coming across is, when you hear about a murder that takes place in New York City, what are your feelings, generally speaking? You're somewhat more upset. Well, if you hear about a murder that takes place halfway around the world, on some level, we all know there are millions of people worldwide who are starving, but if it's not in front of me, it's harder for me to get up and worried about it. So that's one way in this, like we end up judging things based much more on, are they members of our group or are they not? Instead of like objectively speaking, like you can probably say every human being is a human being. therefore everyone's deserving of happiness. But in practice, we end up treating people who are members of our in-group as more worthy of it in some sense. And we end up doing that sort of thing. What are some other ways in which this can happen?
I like the missing white girl hashtag.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, that's a really good example of the most, I can never remember her name, but like the fact of the matter is that the like van life girl who disappeared recently, part of the reason it became national news is because she was a white American girl, and therefore the in-group, she was an in-group member of the online social media community and looked the part of an online social media community member. So therefore the online community jumped on this to a much larger degree than they would if it was like an inner city Black girl who died. And so because of this, because the in-group was the one with control of the social media, it got much more attention, which led to it then making it's getting that much attention was itself then worthy of getting national news attention. And now all of a sudden we have this giant story, which is much bigger than we would necessarily have had for somebody whose death was just as horrific, but was an inner city person of color. And so this is one way in which one thing that in-group preference and out-group dislike can do is what it ends up doing is distorting where our attention goes, very much based on like whoever has some sort of political power is going to be subject to this in-group preference, out-group dislike. And because of this, what ends up happening is people with power end up making decisions partly based on what their in-group is. So how is it that you end up that you have large numbers of people that end up being ignored by the system? Well, one of the main reasons is, well, who is the system ends up affecting this. And so you end up with these sorts of major issues. It's also something as simple as what do people look like in commercials? Well, what people look like in a commercial is very much one of the main ways that commercials get you to buy their product is they're trying to convince you that the people selling this product are part of your group and therefore you should like them. So political parties do the same thing. If they're trying to get you to vote for them, what are they generally going to do? Are they going to talk about all the trips? They're trying to, a politician comes and decides, I want more like CUNY voters. Are they going to talk about all their weekends on the Hamptons that they take the helicopter to? Or are they going to talk about, growing up in New York in a small apartment? And why are they going to do that? They want you to connect with them. Be like, this is an average person. This person's like me. I can like them. They don't want to set themselves up as the other that you are going to have less of a feeling for. And this is why politicians will cater themselves to whatever group they're talking to, and why advertisers will cater themselves to whatever group they're trying to do. So, Coca-Cola will advertise one way on the Disney Channel and a different way on ESPN and a different way on like the movie channel. Or the like nightly news, because they want you to think like, oh, you care about the same things I do. You're in my group. You and I are members of the same group. Therefore, you should like me more. It's also why, how many of you have gone to like a physical in-face salesperson for something like rather expensive? Could be a bed or a car or anything like this. Yeah. What do they start doing? Are they ever get right to business and are just like, let's buy you this thing? What do they start doing? Yeah, they start chit-chatting, getting to know you. And why do they do that? Well, they want to get to know you. One of the main reasons is so that, generally speaking, you take two people, they always have something in common. And so what they want to do is find out enough about you so that they can then talk about their similarities to you. So you now start to feel like you're having a relationship with an in-group member that's selling you this. So like a good car salesman will try to get to know you and then point out the ways in which his life or her life or their life has been like yours. So that you're like, oh, I feel comfortable. I like this person. I will buy something from them. It can then backfire when you get someone like me who just doesn't want to talk to you ever and like just wants to get out of the store as quickly as possible. But very often on a big purchase like this, they will try to, for lack of a better term, butter you up by making you feel similar or connected to them in some way. It's also, again, why commercials will, like simply put, in the past 2 years, there have been a lot more people of color in television commercials. Why? Because now there has been a social change such that American consumers are much more trying to define themselves as an in-group of diverse individuals, and also trying to appeal to more different groups of people. So like the best example, somebody brought this up last class, is Jake from State Farm. You know the State Farm commercials with Jake? Does anyone remember what Jake looked like in the original State Farm commercials? He was like a nerdy white guy, and then somewhere along the line he changed into a good-looking, light-skinned black guy. And major reason for that was to highlight, like, our in-group is appealing to a wider audience. And look, we are listening to the social movements and social concerns of the average American now. We at this company, we care about diversity and inclusion. And we know you do too. Look, we are a member of your in-group. You should buy from us. So this is the way in which this thing, when in truth, you know, in the board meeting, they might, like, very often, if you actually hear what's said, it's much more of a what will appeal to our consumers, not like, do we actually give a damn about diversity? So this is one way in which them knowing this bias can be used against you. It's also why, you know, why on earth do the New York Yankees need an official sandwich sponsor? It's not like, you know, the Yankees, most of them probably aren't eating sandwiches. They're baseball players. They're probably eating their like protein shakes and other things. Why then do they need an official sandwich sponsor? Well, the sandwich sponsor wants to be the official sandwich sponsor of the Yankees, so that anyone who's a Yankees fan feels like, that's my sandwich, I'm going to buy that one. So that's the idea behind in-group preference, out-group dislike. Conformity was our first one, in-group, out-group. Any questions on these two? All right. This one is somewhat related, but somewhat different. Social proof. How many of you have seen a commercial that says we're the #1 selling truck in the world, or we're the #1 sandwich bought in New York City? Why do they bother saying that? Or 4 out of 5 doctors recommend? Why? What's the reason behind this?
I'm sorry, is this another?
This is another one. So this was 1, this was 2, here's principle 3. So,
Oh,
social proof is the third one. Why is it?
It gives us a credibility.
It gives a sense of credibility. The idea is basically, generally speaking, well, how many of you believe the sky is blue when it's sunny out? Hopefully all of you. I mean, some of you might be skeptics, I guess. Blue sky skeptics. I didn't know that was a thing, but maybe. So most of us believe it, and most of us believe it because it's true. And in a lot of cases, like if I drop this marker, it's probably going to fall. Everyone believes it's going to fall, and you believe it's going to fall because it's happened a million times before, and that's a good thing to guess. The issue is that sometimes a lot of people do something not for a good reason. So social proof is basically our tendency to just believe something or do something because a lot of people are doing it. And so this tendency, again, goes back to our like evolutionary ways of, generally speaking, it's a fact that if many people believe a thing, it's usually the case that they believe it because it's true, and they're doing it because it's a good thing to do. Also, again, you don't want to be the one on the outside for conformity reasons. So if you see everyone else believing it, you have a reason to believe it as well. Now, the problem is, of course, not every time that many people are doing it is it a good thing to believe or do. So we got examples of this? Anyone got an example of something where the fact that a lot of people believed it did not mean it was true, did not mean it was good? Or something that we did because how many of you have done the thing that you did because a lot of people were doing it, so you thought it was a good idea, and the next thing you know, it was a terrible idea? I'm sure we've all had something that probably shouldn't be talked about out loud in class, but yeah.
Buying a specific video game.
I mean, yeah, buying any sort of like, this is another one of these sorts of meme or like social proof is one of the major drivers behind how is it that some stupid item ends up being the hottest new toy for Christmas. Like most of the things that become the hottest new toy are dumb, like very truly stupid. And yet as soon as somebody defines it as the hot new thing, then everyone starts thinking, oh, it must be the hot new thing. So therefore it must be pretty cool, or else not everyone would want it. Then the next thing you know, you suddenly own like a bunch of toys. Like the number of stupid things I ended up with as a kid, where I'm just like, once I got the thing, I was like, this is nowhere near as cool as I expected it to be, but I had to have it. Or like how, there will be the something that sells for $1 million just because it's so popular and so rare. And so, yeah, again, and so any time in which the fact that somebody is able to get a lot of people buying something for a dumb reason ends up being able to get a even larger number of people to buy it. This is also, social proof is one of the main ways in which, people can buy, like, why is it that bots work on Facebook? Why is it that somebody can buy a bunch of like fake accounts and get them to like something, and that's worth an investment? Well, the reason why is because once you get 50 likes, it becomes a lot easier to get 500 likes. So if you pay somebody some money to get some likes, now you're well on your way to getting somewhere, to being on the way to being an influencer. It's also why a lot of restaurants will, hire somebody to write a few good Yelp reviews before they open. And these sorts of things happen. Whenever you find a website that like has 2 stars on it, and most of the things are like, this company sucks, and then there's a handful of this company's great, usually it's because you can pay someone. Also, whenever you see somebody playing on the subway, whatever musical instrument they're playing, and let's just assume that like many of these people, they're not actually good at their musical instrument, do they ever just have like an empty hat there waiting for you? Ever is it empty with nothing in it? No, what's usually in their hat? At least some money in it. So you think like, oh, this is what I'm supposed to do. Some people give this person money. So these are all ways in which social proof can be used against you. Another one is anytime you just have a commercial that advertises as the #1 most popular, or 4 out of 5 doctors recommend, or anything along those lines. Basically, just by telling you other people believe it or want it can convince you to believe it and want it without actually taking the time to analyze, because we're busy people.
I feel like that's how really anything works though. Just like demand on any product is that's what the value is.
But I think one of the cool things with, or one of the things with social proof is you can increase demand by just saying there's a lot of demand. And I think that's the real thing, is like, so with any sort of thing, the more demand there is, the more it's going to be worth, the higher the prices. But if you can convince people that there's a large demand, even if there's not, that will create, it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. You can create demand by convincing people that there's already a demand, even if there's not.
It's like a facade.
Yeah, it's basically, it's you trick people into thinking they'll be missing out, even if, they're not. And this is often where I feel like a lot of crappy things that get sold late night on television try to do this, or any sort of new technology. That's another good one of like, why is it that iPhone is so much better selling than other phones? Because really, at the end of the day, iPhone, Samsung, they're probably similar, but once you get that brand loyalty and you see all your friends have iPhones, so all you have to do is, generally speaking, if you're the first one there, you can make it seem like you're the best, even when you're not, simply by getting there first and getting everyone to buy you. So like, why is it that the iPhone was able to take over? Well, it's really the first smartphone. And even though in a lot of ways, like technologically speaking, like most of the super tech people I know do not use iPhones. They prefer to have an Android of some sort because it's just a better thing. But to the average person, we don't get as much out of that. And it's nice to be like part of the crew. Everyone had it. Can't be that all my friends, not everyone can be wrong. That's social proof. All right. How are we doing on time? All right, we should. Are there any other questions on social proof, or ways in which it might be used against you, or anything like that? And yeah, it's rather straightforward, and you can see why it's so appealing. They've actually done studies with it. It's one of the more effective ways to. It can be used for good things too. So they did a study in which they had kids that were terrified of dogs. Like you put them in a room with a dog and they'd have like a little panic attack. And one of the most effective ways to get them to be less afraid of dogs was to show them videos of other kids playing with dogs. And just the proof of like, oh, other children can enjoy this and not be scared, was able to reduce the stress.
I feel like that could even go for like amusement parks or like roller coasters, like I'll let like a bunch of 5-year-olds.
Absolutely. It's also a good way of like convincing children to do something that you need them to do is, why is it that a mom will eat the baby, like a bite of the baby food that the baby's refusing to eat? Well, it's to show like, look, it's good. Mom's doing it, you should do it too. And it works because of this social proof thing. And it works even better if you can get like a few people to do it. So if everybody's starting to do this thing and now I see it's safe and it's cool, then we're all doing it. If I see all the other kids doing it, then I know like, oh, I can do this too. I can go on this roller coaster. And then add in the conformity pressure of like, you don't want to be the one loser who didn't go on the roller coaster. And then now all of a sudden you're definitely riding that thing you didn't want to go on. All right. So yeah, social proof. The next one is what I call, or what is called, I don't just call it this, if I have numbers, I don't also need these little squiggles. 1, 2, 3, 4, halo effect. This one is one of the simplest to follow along with. So first off, what is a halo? And I mean this in the most biblical sense possible. What is a halo? Yeah, it's a little glowing light around somebody's head, usually an angel or Jesus or any sort of divine figure. What on earth is the point of the halo? Like, why is it there? What is it supposed to symbolize?
Signify angel.
Yeah, signifying an angel. And then why, though, is it around an angel? Like, why isn't it around like a mere ordinary person? Yeah, they're good. And they're so good that they're literally glowing light. They are so good that they are releasing this positive energy that shines upon the world. So the same idea with the halo effect. The idea is that if something is positive, it's not just that you like that thing itself. You like anything that is in any way associated with that thing to some degree. So can anyone think of any classic cases in which the halo effect either gets used in advertisements or in anything else?
When they use models for advertising?
Exactly. Netta says they use models for advertising. Yeah. Why do you use attractive people for advertising? Well, simply put, human beings like attractive things to look at, including attractive people. Therefore, if you see an attractive supermodel eating a McDonald's burger, you are going to have a more positive feeling than if you see just, an average human that you meet on the street eating a McDonald's hamburger. Your connections are just at the basic level of this attractive person is doing this thing. I like that attractive person. They're attractive. Now I like that thing a little bit more. It's like basically just mechanical, you like it more. So one thing is, yeah, attractive people. It's also why, generally speaking, people, when they're trying to sell something on the street, they're generally going to have attractive people trying to sell you it. Like if you can get your hands on attractive salespeople, that's who will be selling it. It's like, why is it? Do you remember those, like the stupid Red Bull car that would be driving around and like randomly somebody would be handing you Red Bull and it was inevitably an attractive person? Exactly why. They want you to think, oh, Red Bull, attractive. Beer ads. Why is it that there's always beautiful people in beer ads? Again, part of the reason is this halo effect. What are some other good ones?
You also had the people at I forgot the brand. I think it was Abercrombie.
Yes, Abercrombie and Fitch. That was a really good one where it was literally like, it wasn't just that they wanted their models. They wanted the people working in the store to be attractive as well, so that their attractiveness would make you more likely to buy these clothes. You would want to, just their attractiveness glowed onto the clothes and made it look better. It's also why most mannequins, simply put, are built to be whatever the ideal clientele is. So yeah, all of those. So anything around human attractiveness. What are some other good things that can get people to buy things that they might not otherwise buy, or believe things they might not otherwise believe? Olivia, was that a hand or a hair move? Okay.
Did you even see a burger? You know how McDonald's they make those fake burgers? Like if they actually advertise that real burger.
Yeah. So anything that just makes the product itself look nicer is another thing. So very often with Photoshop, it's changed. But one of the major things they used to do was literally the burgers that were shot in commercials were made out of styrofoam and painted, because they were not actual hamburgers. Another thing is, these days everything is Photoshopped. Why? To make it look better or clearer or more delightful in some way. So yeah, anything that makes the salesperson more attractive or the product itself looking better will bring up this halo effect. Also, How many of you have ever been in a car in, 3 o'clock on a Friday traffic? Describe this experience. Yeah, it's horrible. How many of you have driven upon an empty, open mountain road in a beautiful scenery with nobody around ever? If you're anything like me, you've never done it. And yet, where do the car commercials all get filmed? On a beautiful mountain road, even though all of you have spent a lot more time in bumper to bumper traffic driving cross town for 4 hours. Why? Well, it's because it's supposed to make this beautiful scenery. Our car is associated with beauty and elegance and any sort of thing like that. So if you put the setting. Also, what do painkiller medications or like allergy medication, there's actually a connection. What about like blood thinning medications have to do with puppies? Nothing at all. And yet you go and see those like pharmaceutical commercials, there's always like a golden retriever puppy galloping through a field to its owner. Again, animals, anything animal related is in a commercial just to make you feel better. Why is it that Coca-Cola on Christmas has penguins and polar bears? Do they have anything to do with Coca-Cola? No, we all like cute polar bears and penguins in commercials. They're cute. Why is it that like they will often include famous songs that people like or are catchy in their commercials? Again, halo effect, the same thing. So very often, also humor, any sort of humor in a commercial. Things that make you laugh or smile make you feel better and more likely to buy their product. Like, I mean, I guess things are funnier when one has had beers, but generally speaking, like a can of beer is not inherently a funny thing. It's a metal can with liquid in it. And yet they try to make it feel better by making it an attractive person, like make you laugh. Also, celebrity endorsements is another really good one. Like, everyone loves Beyonce. So if you can get Beyonce to sell your product or endorse you for something, like Beyonce is not a politician, but she's a great person to have endorse your political party. Why? Because people like Beyonce. Simple as that. So yeah, all of that is the halo effect. So does that all make sense? It's a pretty straightforward one. All right, I'm going to, actually, no, I might be able to, all right. Five. Compliance with authority. This is the last social psych concept I want to talk about. And then once this is done, I want to talk about all of them together. And just like what happens when you have, how can all of these things working together lead to some like pretty, well, just about the ways in which all of these things together lead to horrible shit in the world is what I'm going to talk about at the end. All right, so what is compliance with authority? Well, what is it to comply with something? Mostly I just need a sip of water.
To agree with them?
Yeah, to agree or go along with. Yeah, that's what complying is. And from a class or two ago, we have authority. What is authority figure? Yeah, somebody above you, someone with power. So compliance with authority is the tendency of us to go along with what people in power tell us to do.
It's a fallacy, huh?
So yeah, so it is a fallacy, but you can also see why. And the key difference here is it's not just believing it because they say to believe it. It can also be doing things because they tell you to do them, even if you have questions about them. And that's the jump between the fallacy to the compliance. So an appeal to authority is when you say, I believe this thing because an authority figure said so. In compliance, what you can find is people will do things, even if they don't necessarily believe it's the right thing to do, simply because the authority figure told them to. So it is a fallacy, but you can see evolutionarily why this would make sense. Like if your boss tells you to do something and you don't want to do it, and you don't do it, what can happen? You get fired. So yeah, there's some sense with an authority figure, but what ends up happening here is there are cases in which the mere fact that someone appears like an authority figure can lead you to comply with it. So one way in which this comes up, which is somewhat weird, is whenever you have like somebody who looks very doctory in a commercial advertising something, or you have, why do they put those stupid charts in a thing to be like, we brush at this point on your tooth and this point with your tooth. Well, it's to make them seem like they're knowledgeable experts, authority figures on this topic. And then you're more likely to buy their product. But in a more practical sense, there's just people are willing to do things simply because somebody who's in a position of power told them to. And one of the reasons for this is, well, one of them is you don't want to have bad consequences. But another one is simply that we have a tendency, we don't want to feel bad for anything we do. And what's one of the main ways that somebody who did something wrong but doesn't want to feel bad about it, what do they often do? Your child does
They blame
something.
the
And
authority.
so you blame somebody else, be it anyone. And one of the best ways to do it is to blame an authority figure and just say, I was following orders. They told me to. It wasn't my choice. I couldn't have done it any other way. And so one of the reasons that this is worth highlighting is that it can happen. It can lead to some pretty extreme things. So I want to talk about what is one of the most famous social psychology experiments ever. Have people heard of the Milgram Experiments?
I think so, yeah.
All right. So anyone remember? I can go into more detail, but just anyone want
I
to?
just remember from my psych class, but I don't remember. Isn't it the one where they were zapping, they put the volts up, and just because an authority figure told them that, oh, if you get this answer wrong, we're gonna zap this person, electrocute them.
So here, I'll just describe the study in detail for those of you who don't know, but that's a really nice description. It's basically Yale University is in New Haven, Connecticut, and this experiment took place in the 60s. Basically, they put up posters around the neighborhood which said, looking for subjects in an experiment on learning. You will be paid small amounts of money, like a little stipend for a couple hours work. You show up and there's a person there in a lab coat, an experimenter, and one other potential subject, and they look at you two and say, all right, here's how this is going to work. We're studying the effects of punishment on learning. It's been randomly assigned. One of you is going to be a teacher. The other one's going to be the learner. The learner is going to have to do some memory tasks. Every time they get it wrong, the teacher is going to give them an electrical shock. It's not a big shock. It's going to start real small. Here, you could feel it. And they give you a tiny little zap, and it was mildly unpleasant. It was nothing bad. And then they said, but here's how it's going to work. Every time they get it wrong, you're going to give them a little more of a shock. And that's how the experiment's going to go. Now, if you were the person who signed up for this, you are told, and you're going to be the teacher now. So you sit in this chair in front of this panel. And on this panel, there will be a button and a lever. And the lever will control a voltage system. And I don't know how volts work, so I don't know all the numbers, but it started 1 and it went up. And then by about here, it just says danger. And here it says warning, do not use. I think it actually says XXX, warning, do not use at the very top. And there were a whole bunch of little gradients in between. And so the experimenter would start, the person on the other side would get a question wrong, and the experimenter would say, all right, you have to zap them. So you'd zap them. Then they get another one wrong, and you have to move it up and zap them again. And by this point, the person's going ah! Then you start moving it up farther, and now all of a sudden you have a person on the other side of the wall. You can't see them, you just hear them screaming, just going, ow! About up here, they're screaming and pounding on the desk, screaming, oh my God, please make it stop, please make it stop. If at any point you start to doubt, the person in the lab coat who is standing there next to you would say, I'm sorry, we need this data. The experiment must continue. Or, I'm sorry, this must continue. That's all they would say. You were not financially demanded to do it. They weren't gonna this wasn't your job. They didn't have your kids hostage. All they were doing, you volunteered to do this thing. All they would say is, I'm sorry, the experiment must continue. By the time you got up here, the person was screaming their head off and pounding on the walls. And by the time you got to this one, the other side of the wall had gone completely silent. There was no noise. The question that they were studying actually was how many people would be willing to go all the way with this authority figure telling you to. And most of the people beforehand guessed it was going to be small amounts. They asked other psychologists, most guesses were 10%. The twist, of course, is nobody's actually being zapped. The person on the other side was an actor who was just pretending to be getting zapped. You, however, doing the zapping did not know it. To the best of your knowledge, you were basically torturing someone to the point of death on the other side of the wall. Anyone know the punchline? How many people were willing to go all the way and give someone a death-leveling shock even after they stopped making noise?
All of them.
It wasn't all, it was close to all. It was 66%, about 65, 66%, which basically means 2 out of every 3 people. So 1 out of every 3 people is willing to stop this. And 2 out of every 3 was willing to go all the way just because a fancy looking person in a lab coat said so. They did other versions of the experiment. This experiment, they did a ton of different versions. They actually found if the person isn't in a lab coat, people are less likely to go all the way. But the fact that they thought it was Yale made no, even when they did it again without making the affiliation with Yale clear, people went all the way. So basically what we have here with the conformity to authority is if you think of somebody as an authority figure, even if they don't have any direct power over you, like it's not like this person, if you had just gotten up and walked out, they couldn't have like ruined your life or anything. It's just a mere fact they looked like an authority figure, talked like an authority figure, and acted like an authority figure in an authority figure setting led people to do some pretty horrible, horrible things. Or what, I mean, supposedly the people who actually did the shocking also, like it was a lot of the people who were in the experiment, like this experiment would never be allowed today because the people who shocked people all the way were like really troubled afterwards, just because they started like shaking. Some people were like in tears. They basically thought they killed someone and hadn't had the courage to stop it. And so like that really screwed with a lot of people. But it's kind of terrifying that, you know, there are 2, 4, 6, 8 of us here in this room, plus 2, 4, 6 online. So of those 14 people, 10 of us would have been willing to think we killed someone just because someone in a lab coat said so. So those are the social psych topics I want to discuss today. What I want to end with is just the way in which when they end up getting combined together, you can end up with some really horrible stuff. And so what I want to do is just to finish off, I mean, let's just go to the worst of the worst and just talk about the ways in which these sorts of principles together can lead to a genocidal event like the Holocaust. And you can begin to see how, why was it that average everyday German people who prior to World War II were just average people were willing to murder millions? Well, part of it is authority figures were telling them to do it. If somebody higher up, you had a collection of true believers at the top who told the next level down, who told the next level down, who told the next level down. And now all of a sudden you have people who prior to this would never have, and there's many stories of people who in their whole lives had like, were afraid to hurt animals, like had never done a crime, had never hurt anyone, ended up murdering tens of thousands of people, like individually as members of these like rounding up squads of just, this is how these things happen. So part of it is just authority figures tell you so. Halo effect, I'm not sure as much. Maybe the thing you could say is tied in with patriotism. So there's a sense of like, this is what our nation does. We are the greatest. Anyone on the, like, therefore, even if what we're doing is bad, we can look at it as good because our patriotism leads us to think that our nation cannot do a bad thing. Social proof, if nobody's going against it and everybody's just following along blindly, it's much more likely that no one's going to stand up to say something. So if large numbers of people are just staying silent about it, well, then you end up just not stopping and thinking it must be fine if nobody else is stopping this. I must be okay as well. Which also, again, goes back to the compliance with authority because people are willing to just, you know, blame it on somebody else's fault. It was the authority figure. I was just following orders. I need with this job, etc. In-group, out-group. Well, how does this one fit in? It's pretty straightforward. Who was getting killed? Well, members who were deemed the out-group. Why was it that people were so unwilling to step in to stop the murder of minority groups? Well, because they, in their own head, were defining these as the outside group. I am not a member of the Communist Party, therefore, this doesn't affect me. It's communists who are getting murdered. Then I am not Jewish, therefore that's not my in-group, therefore I don't care as much when Jewish people are getting murdered. So that's another way. And then conformity. If nobody's saying a thing, the pressure to be the one person who does is just like by itself, before you put in all that power dynamics and all the ways in which the Nazi party was actually the head of the government and could punish you if you went against this. Simply the fact that all of your neighbors weren't going against it, or all your neighbors went off and joined the war. You didn't want to be the one left out. And if you actually read like the stories of most of the soldiers on either side of World War II who joined, a major thing was they didn't want to be the ones who missed out. They didn't want to be the ones who later their friends were like, you weren't a part of the war. What were you doing? And so just like, these are the reasons in which like you combine all of these perfectly like evolutionary beneficial things, which can now be twisted in different ways. You combine them all together and you end up with like some of the worst atrocities in human history. And that's how these very same principles that come from our caveman times and which can lead us to make bad, like basically reason-based decisions, ignore logic, can then lead to the downstream effects and really crazy things. All right, that's all I want to say on this. Any last questions, comments, concerns? What the homework is going to be for next week, just I think it's going to be due on Tuesday. I think the syllabus says Monday, but I'm going to make it Tuesday. Is going to be what I said before. It's basically, I'm going to say, go online and find an example of an advertisement in which social proof is being used. Give me an example of the halo effect. And that's all it's going to be. And it's going to be like 4 or 5 questions. And I'm going to want you to give me like 2 sentences explaining why it's the halo effect, but I don't need anything too detailed. Just like, and again, if you get a few wrong, I'm not going to take off that much. I just want you to give it a try of trying to find these things out in the wild. All right. I'm going to stop the recording. If any of you internet people have any questions, I will be here for a minute. All